Hi guys, I'm Nick. Thanks for joining me today. Together we're going to take a journey through Linux and give you the knowledge you need to be a power user. But first, we must ask the question, what is Linux? Well, confusingly, it depends on who you ask. In order to get an idea of what Linux is, we've got to go back in time a bit. In the early 80s, Richard Stallman, then working in the AI lab at MIT, started the GNU project with the goal of creating an entirely free and open Unix-like operating system. This all started when the lab got a new printer, but the licenses restricted his ability to modify the code. He had hacked earlier printers to electronically send messages to users who printed items when the printing was complete, as well as notifying other users when the printer was free to use. By the early 90s, there was almost enough GNU software to create an entire operating system. However, their kernel, the GNU Hurd, was not yet complete. Meanwhile, in the early 90s, Linus Torvalds set out on a hobby project to develop a Unix-like kernel known as Linux, and used GNU software such as GNU's C compiler to do it. While a kernel on its own was useless, he ended up including GNU software with the kernel to release an operating system. Later, Richard Stallman's Free Software Foundation sponsored the group Debian to release a GNU/Linux distribution that was completely open for people to use and contribute to. Debian, over the years, grew from a small group of Free Software Foundation hackers to the enormous community that it is today. Due to its popularity, Debian has become the base of countless Linux distributions. Because of how open the software is, anybody can read the source code, modify it, and then redistribute it. Because of this is what we have now. It's kind of a mess. There are so many Linux distributions that a common problem for beginners is, what Linux distribution should I use? While there are a few distros out there that actually include its own software, one of the biggest problems in Linux is how many distros there are, and the fact that a lot of them are the same distribution with new wallpapers and icons, and everything else is the same. Ubuntu was started in the early 2000s and is owned and distributed by Canonical. The base of Ubuntu is Debian, and Ubuntu has become so popular that it has in turn been forked countless times. Forking is a process in which the operating system is used as the base of a new distribution. Ubuntu includes its own desktop environment called Unity, and has recently started distributing phones running a version of Ubuntu. Canonical also contributes bug fixes and other contributions upstream, meaning that they send these changes back to Debian to include in future releases. While Debian releases new versions sporadically, Ubuntu's aim was to capture the stability of Debian but release new versions more frequently. As such, Canonical releases two distributions a year, one in April and one in October. The naming convention of Ubuntu is year-month. So the version we'll be working with was released in October of 2015 and is called Ubuntu 15.10. Every 2 years in April, a long-term support version is released, called LTS, which is officially supported for 5 years, while releases in between LTS versions are supported for only 9 months. The next LTS release will be in April of 2016. So to download Ubuntu, we're going to go to ubuntu.com, and when the page loads, we're going to see in the top navigation that there's an option that says desktop. So just click on that because that's the version of Ubuntu we're going to be working with. And then when you get on the overview page, just click download Ubuntu, the big orange button in the main area. And on this page, it's going to give us a few versions. So it's going to prompt us to download the last LTS release, which was released in 2014 in April. If you're going to be running Ubuntu on a server, it makes sense to run long-term support versions because you only need to install a new version like every 5 years. You can install more frequently because there's a new LTS version every 2 years, but with a non-LTS version, there's only official support and bug fixes and whatnot for 9 months. So we're going to go with one of the 9-month cycles here and download the latest stable release, which is Ubuntu 15.10. This was just released maybe 10, 15 days ago. And we're going to download 64-bit because that's the processor type we're running. You can either click the download button to download it directly in the browser, or you can click alternative downloads and torrents to view what type of other files you can download. Now, if you're running on a really super fast internet connection, it doesn't really make a difference. The in-browser download is probably going to download just as quickly as a torrent. However, if you don't have an incredible internet connection, a torrent download is going to make a lot of sense. It's going to download a lot quicker than it would in the browser. Now, I've already got my version downloaded. It took about 10-15 minutes, and just because I have really bad internet at the moment. The next thing we're going to do, we're not going to install Ubuntu directly onto our hard drive yet. That's an awful big commitment to make when you don't really, when you're not really as familiar with the system. So what we're going to do is go to virtualbox.org. And this is a piece of software that allows us to create virtualized machines, virtual machines, or a virtual computer, if you want to call it that. This allows us to create different virtual machines and set them up differently, as well as install different operating systems on each one. So when you get to virtualbox.org, there's a gigantic button here that you cannot miss. Click on that, and it's going to take you to the download page for VirtualBox. Now, it offers different packages dependent on different operating systems. This is going to be for the host machine, and to put that in clearer terms, the computer that I'm on right now that we can see is running Windows 10, that is the host machine. So I need to download VirtualBox 5 for Windows hosts, this link right here. If you click that, it's going to start the download. Now, I've already got mine downloaded. And we're going to need these in the next few videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. Before we actually get into the installation and use of Ubuntu, we are first going to talk about distributions and what exactly that means. So to explain what a distribution is, we're going to load up this image here. And this image presented this way and in the slideshow in the previous video is so large that it's entirely illegible. So we actually have to zoom in quite a bit here. Now in the previous video I mentioned Debian and how Debian was one of the first major Linux distributions. Along with Slackware, Red Hat, and OpenSUSE, they are the 4 different types of Linux distributions. And a type is categorized based on the package manager. Now there are different Linux distributions that are not based on these 4. For instance, Gentoo and Arch Linux. However, we're not going to focus on those at this time. So Debian starts here in the early 90s. And as time goes on, it begins to get forked, which means that other people come along and use the source code base of Debian to create their own Linux distribution. Now, if we look for Ubuntu, it's, I believe, this brown line right here. We'll see how much forking of Ubuntu there's been as well. So here's Ubuntu, and immediately we've got all sorts of forks happening. Now, there are 2 different types of Ubuntu derivatives, and that is officially recognized and not officially recognized. So a few examples of officially recognized Ubuntu distributions are Kubuntu, Ubuntu Studio, and Lubuntu, Xubuntu, and basically Kubuntu is Ubuntu with KDE pre-installed instead of Unity. So Unity is the desktop environment of Ubuntu. And a desktop environment, we're going to go more in depth into desktop environments in a future video. However, to give a little bit of an idea about what it is, we're going to just have a look at some images here. So this is Unity. It's got a panel across the top of the screen with different indicators, a clock, and this is a user menu that you can access user accounts, system settings, etc. On the left-hand side, it's got another panel that acts as a dock. So opened applications and applications that you pin to the dock will appear here. The top button here is to launch the dash. And now the Ubuntu Dash is incredible. I absolutely love it. While I don't like much anything else about Ubuntu, the Dash is really awesome. So you can actually search for files, programs, etc. And you can even use the Ubuntu Dash to find things online. So it's actually a pretty neat concept. Now, Kubuntu has KDE pre-installed, which is a different desktop environment. And so it's going to look and act differently. Now this is KDE 5 Plasma. They call it their desktop environment. So KDE Plasma 5. And obviously you can see the differences. It's got a window list here of open windows. It's got the indicators and time over here and the main menu right there, which looks like this. Now, the Kubuntu and Ubuntu Studio and others are officially recognized derivatives of Ubuntu, but Linux Mint is not. If we go to linuxmint.com, you'll see that they did in fact develop their own desktop environment called Cinnamon. And Cinnamon, the desktop environment, is absolutely beautiful. It's one of my favorites. If we look for, here we go. Should be able to just click on this. No. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay. So this is Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop environment. It's similar to a classic desktop environment in that it has a panel at the bottom with a main menu and a window list of open windows. Elementary OS is right here. That's another one that I want to talk about. I've used Elementary in the past, and it as well, in very different ways, is very beautiful, very fun to use. The aesthetics alone are just absolutely mind-blowing. They've got the cleanest interface that I've seen. This is a transparent panel at the top with an applications menu, the clock, and indicators, and it's got a dock for open windows. Now, aside from this, their own desktop environment, they've also created other software specifically for use with an Elementary OS, such as the Pantheon File Manager. And that's one of my favorite file managers, just because it does a lot of different things in a really neat way. Now, with Ubuntu-based distributions, installation is practically the same, with a few exceptions. So feel free to explore the different Linux distributions if you don't think you'll have problems following along when things look a bit different. Now, when I get Ubuntu set up, I'm going to make some configurations and changes and show you guys sort of how to do that stuff, but feel free to, explore the vast ocean of Linux distributions. So in the next video, we're actually going to be installing VirtualBox and Ubuntu, and we're going to be playing around with that a little bit and explaining the installation steps. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Hello world, thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to be installing VirtualBox and Ubuntu in VirtualBox. So the files that we've downloaded in the first video, one of them is the actual VirtualBox installer, and then we also have the Ubuntu ISO or disk image. So we're going to start by running VirtualBox installer as administrator. Now the installation of this is pretty straightforward. It doesn't really require you to configure anything. So once it comes up, just hit next, 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 yes, and then install. And once this installs, you'll see how we are able to create virtual machines or virtual computers that we can run on our host Windows operating system. And the virtual machines will have their own virtual disk image, which is basically like a hard drive. So we can create that, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So once the installer finishes, we're going to leave that checked because we want to start the VirtualBox immediately. So just hit finish, and it should start up here, right there. So this is a VirtualBox. It's a very clean and simple interface. You've got a menu bar up here, which you'll probably never touch. And then you've also got a toolbar with icons here. So to get started, we're going to hit New to create a new virtual machine, and I'm going to name it Ubuntu. The type is Linux, and the version is going to be, it should default to Ubuntu 64-bit, which is great because we've got a 64-bit disk image to use. So click Next, and here we're going to allot it a certain amount of our actual RAM to use on the virtual machine. You can set this to whatever you like. Typically, you don't want to go into this orange or pink field because that's going to give you less RAM on your host machine. So I typically like to set it to about half of my total RAM, which is 4096 megabytes, 4 gigabytes. Once you've got this set, just hit Next, and we're going to create a virtual disk now. We're going to be using the VDI or VirtualBox Disk Image format, so just hit Next. The difference between dynamically allocated and fixed size is that in a moment we're going to be able to choose a target size for the VirtualBox disk image. With a fixed size, that's always going to be the same. So it's always, if we set it to 20 gigabytes, that's always going to consume exactly 20 gigabytes on our host hard drive as a file. If we dynamically allocate it, what that means is that we can set the target size to 20 gigabytes, but if there's only like 5 gigabytes of actual data on that virtual drive, it's only going to consume that 5 gigabytes on our host drive as a file. So dynamically allocated is always what I use. It just seems better. So hit Next, and here is where we are able to choose the target size of the hard drive. So I'm going to choose 20 gigabytes. Hit Create, and here is our virtual machine. We have an option to start it right now, which is going to be useless because we haven't yet told it what type of installation media we want to use. So select the VirtualBox in the left-hand menu and hit Settings. When the settings comes up, there's not much we need to really do here. If we go to System, we need to make sure Enable I/O APIC is on. Hardware clock and UTC time should be defaulted as well. If we go to the processor tab, we see that it's using 1 core of my quad-core processor. Now we can increase this, but I find you get worse performance the more cores you use, so we're not going to do that. Acceleration should always be enabled. If you have trouble with this and you're on Windows 10, you've actually got to do something else. So if I go into Programs and Features by right-clicking on the Start menu icon, then go to Turn Windows Features on or off. Now, here's an interesting thing. Hypervisor is a virtualization technology that Windows includes by default. I'm not sure if it's pre-configured to use. If it's checked, that means it is. If it's unchecked, it means it's not. So if you have trouble with setting up a virtual machine, basically what you're going to want to do is first of all, come in here and make sure this is disabled. So make sure it's unchecked. If it's checked, uncheck it. It's going to prompt you to restart. Once that's configured, you've got to actually go into your BIOS and you've got to enable virtualization technology for your processor. So to boot into the BIOS, you're going to restart your computer normally, and as soon as it comes back on, before you see the Windows logo or anything like that, you're going to repeatedly strike the key. It's normally F10. Your motherboard might have a different key that it uses to get into BIOS. Sometimes it's F2. So just try that, and once you get into the BIOS, follow these images and you should have no trouble at all. So back to the VirtualBox. If we go to display, we're going to see that the video memory is set really low at 12 megabytes. That's not going to really help much. So what we're going to do is put that up all the way to the end, which is 128 megabytes. It should give better performance, and we're going to enable 3D acceleration. 2D acceleration is only available on Windows guest machines, so that's irrelevant at this point. If we come down to the storage item, this is what we need to use to tell the virtual image to load up our Ubuntu ISO. So select the empty disk here, and on the right hand side you'll see this icon here. I've already pre-selected it in a previous run, but what you're going to do is click Choose Virtual Optical Disk File, and then browse to where you saved the ISO. Select it and hit Open. Now this tells the virtual machine that we want to use this ISO to boot off of and to install the system. We don't really need to go through anything else, so just hit OK, and now we can start the virtual machine. It might take a little bit longer to load in a virtual machine as opposed to actually booting the ISO image on your hard drive. That's a process we'll cover later, but for right now, we're going to stick with VirtualBox, and it is a bit laggy, so I apologize for that. So here is the loading screen. It's very minimalistic running in VirtualBox. It is quite a bit different, but again, we'll get into that. So we're just going to wait for it to boot. It showing a warning message there that's not really important because it is going to load. Now, once it does load the interface, we're going to see that we get scroll bars here. We can scroll up and down or left and right. We don't want that. That's going to make it difficult to navigate the machine. So what I'm going to do is go up to View, go to Full Screen Mode. Now in full screen mode, if you want to exit, you've got this little menu down at the bottom that you can access. You can unmaximize it, you can entirely close it if you want to. We're just gonna let it load up the installation. Now when loading the installation, you can try it first, or you can just install it straight to the disk, or the virtual disk in this case. So I'm going to click Install Ubuntu. For the purpose of this video, I don't want the installation to take too long, so I'm not going to download updates while installing, but I am going to install third-party software. If you're using this on your personal machine and not a server, you're probably going to want this because this allows you to play MP3, MP4 videos, and a host of other file formats that it will recognize with proprietary third-party software. So we're going to hit continue. So running in VirtualBox, it's going to be safe to erase disk and install Ubuntu. It's not going to erase your entire hard drive. It's going to use the 20 gigabyte virtual hard drive that we have predefined in previous steps. However, I want to show you a little bit more about the partitioning that we're going to be, again, diving into in a later video, but for right now, it's a good idea to have a bit of knowledge. So select something else and hit continue. And this is our virtual disk drive. It's called SDA. What we're going to do is create a new partition table because we haven't, it's a fresh hard drive there. Hit continue on that message, and we've got 21,000 megabytes of free space. Now we're going to create a partition which is going to serve as a swap area. Now, swap space is basically like extra RAM that's, oh, I forgot to resize that. Let me change this here. I'm going to delete it and start again. So this is our free space. Create a swap drive. So in the use as drop-down, select swap area. Change this to about 5 gigabytes. That should be fine, and hit OK. So swap space serves as sort of extra random access memory that is not on the RAM, but it's actually on the hard drive. So it's a bit slower than RAM, and it uses it for different reasons, and it's necessary. So on an actual installation, I like to set that to about 8 to 16 gigabytes, but we're working with limited space here, so I'm going to make it 5 gigabytes. Now, once you get that created, you're going to see that the free space is now down here, and we've got 16 gigabytes left. So hit the plus sign down here. We're going to use it as ext4 journaling file system. That's just the file system type. If you drop that down, you've got all sorts. You can use the old FAT32, FAT16. We're going to stick with this. This is the best option to choose when running Linux. It's really fast. And the mount point, we're going to set that to a /. And what that is going to tell the installation is that we want to use this partition that we're creating right now, the 16 gigabyte partition, as the entire file system. So in Linux, / represents the root. And if I wanted to set this to my home partition, which is a specific partition for user files, I could actually type home, reduce that size, and then use another partition for the root. We'll get more into that. This is pretty flexible, so I'm just going to install everything to this partition and hit OK. The device for bootloader installation, typically we don't need to touch that at all. Ubuntu is pretty smart with determining where to install the bootloader. Now we're installing this in legacy mode, not EFI. If you've ever heard of EFI, it's an awesome technology to use when dual booting multiple operating systems. But as for this demonstration, we're in VirtualBox and we've only got one. So it's going to install it in a legacy mode, and the bootloader is going to be written to the very first sector of this disk drive. So when you're ready to move forward and you've got something that looks similar to this, hit install now. This is going to basically ask you, are you sure you want to make these changes, because everything is going to be lost for any partitions that you're going to format, which are these two here. Yes, we want to do this. Here we're going to choose our time zone. You've got smart areas where you can pick. You'll see the actual location down here. When you've chosen your time zone, hit continue. We're going to choose a keyboard layout. For most of us, this should be fine to use English US for the keyboard layout. If you've got any of these alternative keyboard layouts, you're going to want to choose the correct one. Otherwise, keys may be mapped incorrectly. Um, I really can't help you with determining which one to use. You can actually type here to test. So if I want to make sure my left key under the A is a backslash, I'm going to click that, and it's not actually. That's weird. I never use that key anyway, so I always use the English US. Let me see if they've got English Canada. They've got UK. French Canada. We're going to stick with this even though one key is messed up. We've still got 1, 2, all the numbers and all the letters, so that's the most important thing. So hit continue once you've chosen the correct keyboard layout based on your keyboard. And now we're going to set up our user. The computer name, this can be anything you want. It's a way to identify your machine, both in computer language and if you're looking, for instance, on your router and you're trying to see what machines are connected, the computer's name will be shown. So I'm going to name this Megatron. And then choose your username and your password. And you've got some extra options here. Log in automatically or require password to log in. This one's more secure. If you throw caution to the wind, you might want to select this option. And then hit continue. Now we're presented with a little demonstration of what to expect with Ubuntu. You can use these icons to scroll left and right. This demonstrates the Software Center where you can install and uninstall and manage software on your computer. Comes with a Rhythmbox music player, which is great. I've had no need to use anything else. So comes with some image software. GIMP, you can install it. It's not pre-installed. This is basically like an open source alternative to Photoshop, and it's got the video editor as well. Firefox is pre-installed. Chromium you can install, and you can also install Flash. Chromium is an open source version of Google Chrome. You can also install Google Chrome, and we're going to be going through that in the next video, which is going to be a basic configuration. You've got LibreOffice pre-installed. One great alternative to LibreOffice is called WPS Office, and I've actually had the pleasure to try that out recently. It doesn't use the ODT format, so it's not going to suit me. So I'm going to stick with LibreOffice once we get this installed. Here's an image of how you can customize your machine. You can set the background, obviously, that's a feature you would expect with an operating system. You can also make other configurations, and we're going to get to that directly in the next video. And this is how to get support with Ubuntu. So Ubuntu has a lot of great outlets for asking questions or reporting bugs. There are bugs. You'll probably not encounter any, or if you do, they'll be small and really won't affect you, hopefully. We have some links here that we can go to once we reboot into the full operating system. This again is just the installer. Community.ubuntu.com. They've got forums.ubuntu.com and also ubuntu.com/support. They've also got chat. I think it's Freenode is the chat server. They've got their own channel on there. So we'll also look at that once we can reboot into the system. So for right now, I'm going to pause the screencast, and I will be back once the installation is done, and we can have a look at the system itself. All right, so the installation has been a success, and at this point we need a restart. So I'm going to, and I'm also going to hover my mouse over this bar and select Devices and uncheck this disk. I think we need to wait actually. All right. So this should restart now and take us into the Ubuntu system. Hey guys, so the virtual machine actually locked up there on that warning message, so I had to use the window controls to actually close it. Hopefully you guys don't have the same issue. But once we have that shut down, we want to make sure that it's not going to try to boot up using the same ISO because we no longer need to install it. So we need to make sure that this is empty. Um, if this is checked, just click it. It should uncheck it. Hit OK. And now we're going to start the machine. So it should be exactly the same as the previous boot process. It's going to show this screen, and then it should show the Ubuntu loading screen. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click View in the menu bar and go to full screen mode. You can also click a combination of the right control key and F in order to do this. So this is called Light DM. It's the login screen manager for Ubuntu. We see our user here and a password, so I'm going to put in my password here and hit enter. There we go. So this is Ubuntu, and it's going to load up with a modal during your first launch that shows you keyboard shortcuts. The most notable thing here is that the super key here is what the Windows key is called. So on your keyboard, you've got a key in the lower left that has the Windows icon on it. That is the super key. So thanks for joining me, and in the next video we're going to be going through a basic configuration of the system. Hello world, this is Nick. Thanks for joining me again. In this video we're going to be setting up Ubuntu and performing some basic configurations for the system. First off, we need to install a VirtualBox component called Guest Additions, and this allows us to run the virtual machine more stable and with higher performance. So as again in the previous videos, I'm going to full screen. And then once you've got this, in the menu bar on the bottom, you're going to select Devices and insert Guest Additions CD image. I've already inserted that, which is right here. Now, as you can see, the performance here is quite horrible. So I'm going to run this. I click on Properties. I'm going to make sure that it's executable, and it is. Now we do have to go into the terminal or command line for a moment. So this is going to be your first look at the terminal. We are going to cover quite a bit of the command line interface in Linux in, I believe, the second or third module of this series. It's quite big and it can do quite a bit. So hit the super key and that's going to bring up the dash. You can also click this icon on the top left to bring up the dash. Here we have different scopes. So the default home scope is going to be loaded right now. I'm going to switch to applications. In applications, we're going to see installed recently used plugins. So I'm going to select installed, and here we can actually look at the applications that are installed in the system right now. This is pretty inefficient if you're trying to launch an application and know exactly which application you want to load. So I'm going to close the dash here. Turn to the desktop. I'm going to hit the super key to bring up the dash again. And I'm just going to start typing the application name that I want to run. In this case, it's going to be terminal. And you can see at this point, once I get term written in there, the first result is terminal. That's what I want to launch. If the application you are looking for is the first in the list, you can just hit enter. And it should launch that application. Now, there are shortcuts also in Linux to launch terminal. And one of them is to just click Control, Alt, and T on your keyboard at the same time. And that's going to bring up terminal here. Now what we need to do is open it in this specific location. So within the file manager, I'm going to right click and click Open in Terminal. Now here we can see this is the location that we're in. We're in VBox Editions right here. So what I'm going to do is run this program here. It must be run with administrative privileges, which means you need to add sudo to the beginning of this command. And the great thing about Linux is that for anything to actually modify the core of the system, install applications, remove them, stuff like that, it requires administrative rights, and it's going to force you to enter your password. Now this can get frustrating sometimes, and so there are ways around it, and we're going to discuss that in very near future. Run files, or files with .run file extensions, can be run directly from the terminal by just basically typing the name of the file and run. Now, why I put a period and a / here is to indicate to the terminal that the file that we want to run is in the current directory. So period / in Linux means current directory. And that would be this. This is the directory we're in. So this tells it that the file is in this directory, and the run extension automatically runs it. So we don't really need to, issue a whole ton of commands. It's pretty simple as far as running files. Now it's adding kernel modules. So the kernel, as we discovered in video 1, is called Linux. That is the kernel for Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora. Every Linux distribution out there uses Linux as the kernel. So the kernel's job is to translate between software and hardware. And so in this instance, what we've got right now is a screen resolution is pretty terrible. I think it's 1280 by 768. So it's very square, not widescreen. So what we're going to do by installing these modules, this is going to allow us to configure the screen resolution to that the hardware actually supports. And so that's why we need to install VirtualBox guest editions in order to get better performance. It's also very laggy right now, and what we should see is that once we reboot after installing these VirtualBox editions files, when we reboot, we should see a huge increase in performance, which is going to be great. Seems like this is going to take a little bit, so I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back when this successfully installs. All right, people, so it is done. So what we're going to do, as suggested on this line in the terminal right here, we may want to restart. So close this, and this is painfully laggy. It's not just, a bit laggy, it's pretty painful. So in the user menu here, the cog icon, we're going to go down to shutdown and select restart. So as you can see, the first notable thing once restarting with guest editions installed is that the resolution is now correct. It's running at 1366 by 768 pixels, which is exactly what we wanted. I'm going to enter my password and hit enter. And now we're going to see if it's actually going to speed up and provide better performance for us. And that looks to be the case. I'm going to open the dash. It's a bit laggy, but not too painful. So that's good. Now, we're actually going to get into the customizations. So the dash here, or the launcher on the left-hand side, already has some items pinned to it. If you don't want something pinned, you can simply right-click, unlock from launcher. Now, let's say you want to move stuff around. You can hold your left mouse button until it slightly displaces it, and then you can move it up and down and place it wherever you want to. In order to get to the configurations that we want to make, we need to download some files. So open up Firefox, and what we're going to be looking for is a theme and an icon theme. Now, what is a theme in Linux? GTK is the theming engine that Unity uses, Unity being the desktop environment we're currently in. The GTK theme controls everything about how things look. And so these window controls appear this way right now. The title bar is a dark gray. The selected color is orange, which means if I select items, it's orange. If I select something over here, it's orange as well. These are all things that we can change, but in order to do that, we need some GTK themes, and we get those by going to gnome-look.org. Now, in my experience with Ubuntu 15.10 so far, where it's newer, it's using GTK version 3.18. And so older GTK themes appear to break. We may be able to see that here. This is a theme for GTK 3.16 and 18. Let's have a look at that. We can click on the images here to see larger versions of the image. And that looks like a neat theme. I think I want to use that. So in order to do that, we scroll down here where we see the download links, and we want to make sure it's compatible with our GTK version. So click download on the second link on this theme. You guys feel free to really explore the themes here on GNOME Look, and we will install them together. You guys can pause the video if you want to and find some. Some of the links to download the themes and icons link to other locations. This specific instance is DeviantArt. And so I will click the download button here. It's a 4.5 megabyte archive file. And so I'm going to open it with my archive manager. You could also save the file to your downloads directory, but I just want to open it. Now, once it's opened in the archive manager, we can see the theme file here. We're not going to select that. We're just going to click extract. And this is going to open up a file browser where we can actually choose where we want to extract it to. So I'm just going to put it in downloads and then select extract. Once it's done extracting, we can either close this message and leave the Archive Manager open. We can show the files and leave the Archive Manager open, or we can quit. I'm going to click quit for now. We're also going to need an icon theme, and there are similar issues with the icons as there are to GTK themes for different versions of GTK. Some icon themes don't appear to have every necessary icon, so they can look a little messed up. I think I like this one. So again, I'm going to check it out in a larger image here, and that does look pretty nice. That's nice and flat. So I'm going to download that here. Now, icon themes typically are a lot larger than GTK themes. I've seen archives as large as, 300 megabytes. That's quite large. There's no download button here. So let's look and see if they have a different way to install them. Here's the download link right here. It's on GitHub. I'm going to click that, and I'm also going to open that with the Archive Manager. And while that's doing its thing, we're also going to find a nice wallpaper that we want to use. So I'm going to search this. Go to images. I'm going to take this one. Once it loads the image, I'm going to right click and click Save Image As. I'm going to save it into my Downloads directory. We've got about 1 minute remaining for the icons here, so I'm just going to minimize Firefox, and we are going to install an application that we need in order to really configure the system. You could go to the system settings, and this is good for some things, and I'll show you here in one moment, but there actually is a tool designed to give you even more control over your system. So this is the system settings, and here you can very minimalistically change the appearance, and by that I mean it lets you change the wallpaper and the size of the icons on the left. That's not exactly how much customization we want to do. It also has a behavior tab. You can auto hide the launcher if you want to. We don't want to, so I'm going to turn that off. It gives you great control for mouse, your power settings. You can change the screen display if your screen isn't displaying at the correct resolution. You've got sound settings, and you've got a lot of other things here. So explore that if you'd like. I'm going to close that for now. Here's the icon archive that we downloaded. I'm going to extract this into my downloads directory. Now I'm going to install something called the Tweak tool. This is the tool that I was referring to earlier that's going to allow us to really configure the system. So bring up terminal with Control-Alt-T. And once terminal comes up, we're going to run another task as an administrator. So we're going to type sudo. The program we want to use is called apt-get, which this is what you use to manage software, either install or uninstall. The action we want apt-get to do is going to be install, and then what we want it to install is called Unity tweak tool, and then hit enter. Put in your password. It's not going to show the letters being typed, but it is going in. I'm going to quit out of that now. While it's installing Unity Tweak Tool, there's something we need to do with files. So if we go to my home directory and then into downloads, here are the files that we've saved. This is the icon theme and this is the GTK theme. So these are the actual theme directories. We can see if we go in here, we should see some other files that include an index of the theme. So these are the files we're going to copy. So we're going to select them all and hit Control C to copy them. Then hit Control T to open a new tab in the file manager. And in the new tab, we're going to go to Home. We can't see the hidden directories. So hit Control H. It's going to allow us to see all the hidden files and directories. Now, any file or directory that begins with a period is denoted as a hidden location or hidden file. We need to create one of these for themes. So right-click and select New Folder. Type in period themes and hit enter. Then in this themes directory, hit Control V. We're going to paste the themes that we selected in the other tab there and copy them over. We need to do roughly the same thing for icons. So if I go back to my other tab here, back up to downloads, and then into the icon theme directory. Okay, so it's one level up that we've got to copy. So go back to downloads, Control C. Let's go back to our other tab here. Go back up to home. Now we need to create another hidden directory called icons. It's very straightforward stuff. So period icons, enter. And it's lagging a bit. There we go. Let's go into this directory and then Control V to paste the previously copied files. Alright guys, that actually took a really long time. I suspect because it's running in a virtual machine, it's emulating the file system type. I really can't wait till we can install it directly to the hard disk, which is going to be not in the next video, but in the module after that. But we finally got the icon theme copied over into the icons directory. We have also got the Unity Tweak tool installed. So if I open up the dash and type tweak, it may not find it because we just installed it. There's an issue I've been noticing with Ubuntu 15.10 so far, is that changes in the dash aren't made as soon as they should be. So I'm gonna scroll through here and see if we can see the dash hasn't been updated. So I'm going to take this opportunity to explain to you guys a little bit about how a file system works. If we go to computer, that is going to go to the root directory, as I explained in the previous video. Now /home is right here. That's where our user directory is. /user is used by the system for a lot of things. Bin in this user directory contains binary files that you can run. But you wouldn't typically run them by navigating to the bin directory. We're going to go back to user, and you guys feel free to do the exact same thing if you have the same problem. We're going to go into share, And the share directory in user basically is used as a place to house configuration files for the binary applications. We have an applications directory, and this directory has all of the installed applications. These are all .desktop files. You can't see the file extension, but that's what they are. And basically, when you run one of these or from the dash, these files contain what binary files to run, from where, how, etc. Should see Unity Tweak tool right here. There we go. So if you double click on that, it's going to launch the Tweak tool, which is exactly what we want to happen. And now this is what we're going to be using to customize the system. First thing I want to do before I even do that, I want to change my desktop wallpaper. It's as simple as this. Find an image file on your file system. In this instance, it's in our downloads directory. Right-click it and select Set as Wallpaper. Good stuff. Now I want to change some things about the launcher. Here we can also set it to auto hide, which we're not going to do. We can change the icon size, so I'm going to take it down to 38 pixels. I'm going to make it a bit more transparent. You can also change it to a custom color rather than a color based on the wallpaper. So this would be blue in this instance. If I turn transparency all the way down, we see what color actually is chosen. So I'm going to set that to about there. We can change the panel as well. Looks like it locked up a little bit. There we go. We can make the panel entirely transparent if we want. We can make it kind of transparent, or we can make it not transparent at all. This really depends on the theme we're going to be using. If we go back to Overview, we're going to come down to Appearance and select Theme. Our theme doesn't look like it works, so let's have a look. I'm going to go up to my home directory, come to Themes, see, there we go. Here's the problem. So in each one of these, we need to take the directory and pull it back to Themes. So in the theme dark, I'm going to pull that up to Themes. It's not working. Hold on, this is very sensitive. Let me try that again. Once we see that, we should be good to drop it. There we go. Go into the main theme file, drop it right there. All right. Now, we do actually have to restart Unity Tweak tool. Still not picking it up. Cool. So we're going to go to Computer, User, Share, Applications, way down to the bottom, launch Unity Tweak tool. Select Theme. Now we can select the theme that we want to use. There we go. This is actually broken, it appears. See the window. You can see a bit of fray right there. Looks like it is indeed broken. So this is one of those broken themes I was talking about. It's not too broken though. You really can't notice. And then over in icons, we're going to select the icon theme that we also just downloaded, which was Masala. We can go over to cursor as well. Change it to a black cursor. Let's go to Window Controls. This doesn't work. I've noticed this and it hasn't been fixed yet. It's going to keep the window controls up here. I'm going to come back to the panel settings because it's very transparent at this point. Oh, that looks nice. Oh, it's supposed to be entirely transparent. Set it like that. That looks all right. There we go. So we have a briefly customized version of Ubuntu. Feel free to explore a little more and do any configurations that you want to do. In the next video, we're going to be discussing desktop environments. So this is Unity, albeit a slightly customized version of Unity. In the next video, we're going to be installing Cinnamon and maybe a few others. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be installing Ubuntu alongside our Windows installation on our actual hard drive. So you're going to need a few things for this. First, you're going to need a USB disk drive. I recommend 8 gigabytes or larger. And you also need a program called UNetBootin. So to get that program, open a web browser and type in unetbootin.sourceforge.net. And when you get to this page, download the Windows version. And I'm going to select Open. Now, while this is downloading, I want you to plug your USB disk drive in. And once it's in, right-click on your Start menu icon. This should be the same for every version of Windows since Windows XP. When you right-click it, you should get a menu, and there should be disk management in that menu. So click on that, and we're going to format our USB drive in order to be able to install the ISO image of Ubuntu on it, which we downloaded in the first video. So in the disk management screen, you're going to see a lot of things. Actually, you're probably only going to see a few things because you haven't yet done any formatting to your hard drive. So what you should see is a few smaller partitions at the beginning of your hard disk, and then a very large C drive, which should be NTFS. That's your Windows partition. Mine have already got some partitions here from previous Ubuntu installations. We're not going to worry about the disk 0 right now because that's not what we're focusing on. First, we need to find our USB stick. You can usually find it by the size of the device, and right-click on it and click Format. And you can name it anything you like. The important thing is that the file system must be FAT32 in order to boot off of the USB stick. So make sure that's selected, leave everything else, and I recommend checking this perform a quick format, otherwise it's going to take a while. So leave that checked. Okay. Now it's going to format and it should happen pretty quickly. And then what we're going to do is once it's done, you actually need to unplug it. So remove it from your USB port. And then put it back in. And what this is going to do is it's going to mount it so that UNetBootin can see it, and so we can install on there. Now I got a notification here that said it's the F drive, so it's already selected, so I don't need to do anything here. I need to select disk image because we're going to specify the ISO image that we're going to burn to this USB disk drive. So hit this button over here and browse to the file that you want to install. So mine is in Downloads, Ubuntu.
And this is the same ISO image we downloaded in the first video. It's the same one that we installed in VirtualBox, and we're going to be using it now as well. So select it and hit open. Now, if your drive is blank because you took the disk, the USB disk out and then put it back in, all you have to do is toggle this over to hard disk and then back to USB drive. It should find it. You should have a list here. Make sure you choose the appropriate one and then hit OK. Now it's going to start the burning process onto the USB disk, and this is going to take a little bit. It should take 5 minutes or so. I will be back when mine has successfully burned. So when it completes, you should see this screen, and it's going to prompt you to reboot now or exit. Now it's important that you do one thing before you reboot your computer. Windows has a feature called Fast Startup. And that's going to interfere with your ability to access the Windows drive. So we are going to need to repartition the Windows drive, so we need access to it from Ubuntu. Now, how Fast Startup works is basically when you shut down your computer, normally your computer doesn't fully shut down. And so there's still things running, or at least a saved state. So it's like hibernation. So we need to change how that works. So what you're going to do is right-click on your battery icon and click Power Options. I'm going to go to Change Plan Settings here. And then on the bottom, click Change Advanced Power Settings. And that's not where we need to go at all. Sorry about that. Cancel it here. All right, here it is. So on the left-hand side, choose what the power button does, and then change settings that are currently unavailable. And this will allow us to change the settings down here. Now this should be checked unless you've manually turned it off already. What you want to make sure is that this is unchecked, and then hit Save Changes. So feel free to either reboot now or exit and then manually restart the computer. So when your computer's turned off, you're going to turn it on, and you're going to have to press the key to enter into the BIOS boot menu. I'm working on an HP laptop here, so my key is F9. So when you hit the power key, you're going to need to repeatedly tap this key to make sure that you get it at the right time. It's usually a small window of opportunity there to get it. So I'm going to just tap on the F9 key, and I'll be presented with this. You should have something similar. Now, if you're on an EFI system, that's great. Make sure you choose the USB drive UEFI and hit enter. So you're going to use your up and down key and then hit enter when you select the correct device. And this is going to let us boot off of the hard disk. So click Try Ubuntu, and then just wait for it to start up. It should be relatively quick. And there we go. We're now booted into Ubuntu. So select the, double-click the Install Ubuntu icon on the desktop. And when it opens the installer, select your language. And when you're ready, hit Continue. You're going to want to connect to a Wi-Fi network unless you're connected through Ethernet. I've already connected to a network, so I'm not going to do this. But connect to your network so that you can download updates while installing, and you can get the most fresh packages from the repositories. And hit Continue. You're gonna see these big check marks telling us that we're all good to go. You're also going to want to check download updates while installing, and also install third-party software. And I've already got these checked. You want to make sure they're checked. If they're not checked, check them. You don't need to install third-party software. All this allows is for playing MP3 files and other proprietary file types. So when you're ready here, hit continue. And this next bit is going to take a little bit because it's scanning our hard drive. So when you see this screen, it's going to prompt you to install Ubuntu alongside Windows. We're not going to do that. We're going to manage the partitions by ourselves manually, and that's going to give us a little bit more control. So select something else at the bottom, and then hit continue. Now it's going to scan the disk again, and you're going to see something entirely different here. All right, this is our Windows partition. We can tell by first it's formatted as NTFS and also the size of the drive. This is my free space. What you're going to want to do is right click on the NTFS file system. Hold on a second, I just got to remove this two-finger scroll. There we go, much better. This is the EFI partition. We're going to focus on the Windows partition right now. You're going to need to shrink this and in order to get the free space. So click on this and click change down at the bottom. And you're going to just reduce the size of this. Windows does take up quite a bit of space and the applications on it, so I recommend leaving this relatively high. I've got about 500 gigabytes that I use for my Windows partition, and I find that's comfortable. So once you've done this, hit OK, and you're going to see the disk rescan, and it's going to show you that you've now got free space after your Windows partition. So we now need to set up a few partitions. So click the free space and the plus sign. And the first partition we're going to be creating is a swap area, which acts sort of like RAM, but on the hard disk. So in the size of the swap area, you're going to want to make it about double the amount of RAM that you've got. And when it refreshes here, we see our swap area we just created with the free space after it. So now we're good to create our main partition for the installation of Ubuntu. So make sure you use ext4 journaling file system and set the mount point to a / and hit OK. And basically the / just means the entire operating system, the home directories, applications, configurations, they're all going to be installed to this partition. Now, Linux gives us a little bit more flexibility that we're not going to really go in depth with right now, but you are able to create two different partitions, one for the / the main partition, and then you can also create another one, set the mount point to / home. And that's going to mean that all your user directories are stored on that partition. And this makes sense for upgrading and installing different versions of Linux because the home directory will always stay intact. You won't need to format it every time you install Linux, and you can install Linux over the root partition. So now that we're set up here, we're basically good to go. The device for the bootloader is important. If you're not running an EFI system, you need to leave this to dev/SDA. And what that means is that the bootloader is going to be written to the very first sectors of the hard disk, which is where non-EFI hard drives store their bootloaders with Windows. So it will replace the Windows partition or the Windows bootloader and replace it with Grub, which is the Linux bootloader, but it will also give you an option through that installation of the bootloader to boot into Windows. Every time you boot up your computer, you're going to see boot into Linux or boot into Windows. All right, now I'm working with an EFI hard disk, and hopefully you are too. Every computer released in the last few years are now EFI. And EFI is great. It's a way where you can better manage dual and tri-booting different installations or operating systems on your hard disk. And what this does is if you've got an EFI partition, as you can notice, mine selected in the area above is SDA2, but the type is EFI. and System says Windows Boot Manager. All right. Where we're using an EFI disk, we are going to install the EFI files for the bootloader on the existing EFI partition, which is SDA2. So when we're already here, you can now click Install Now. It's going to tell you that it's going to make these changes and they're going to be permanent, and you may lose data if you've done something wrong. So please make sure you do this all correctly. It will leave your Windows partition intact because you're not formatting it, you're just shrinking it, and you're creating a couple new partitions. So when you review these changes, hit Continue, and it's going to install the operating system now to our hard disk. And the installation procedure is exactly the same as it was in VirtualBox. So you're going to choose your location or your time zone first. So here we're going to select our keyboard layout. I am English US keyboard layout. So I'm just going to leave it and hit continue. And here we're going to create our user account. So I'm going to name my computer Voltron and username and password. And you do have a few options also to log in automatically or require your password. You can set this however you want. I like to require my password to log in. So just hit continue, and now you're presented with this beautiful slideshow of everything Ubuntu can do. Not everything, but a few things. And we're going to dive into more of these things in the future. But for right now, I'm going to pause this recording, and I'll be back after it installs because it does take about 10 to 15 minutes. So when it's done, you should see a prompt like this, and it should tell you that the installation has been a success and you're now free to either continue testing on the USB drive or restart now. You can do whatever you'd like. Just if you're going to continue testing, the way you reboot is in the top right-hand corner. Select the gear icon and then select shutdown.